this is my review of Assassination Classroom. Okay, so the island assassination arc reaches its climax in this episode, and we finally find out who's in charge of the whole poison half of the class thing, and and who's been in charge of Gastro, Grip, and Smog this entire time. We finally get an answer to that, and the answer may surprise you. More on that in a minute. So it starts off in the fight with Gastro. Gastro is pointing out that he doesn't feel like any of them have any interest in homicide, and simply asks them to come out with their hands up, since he believes that they're not actually going to try and kill him. But that notion is completely gone when Hayami opens fire on him with the gun that she got last episode, and tries to shoot his gun out of his hand. It doesn't work because she misses. Mainly because it's got live ammunition and she's hesitant to shoot somebody by accident. But it's enough for Gastro to realize that they're not just middle school students, and they're actually fully trained assassins. At which point he decides that things are about to get interesting, and proceeds to turn on the house lights on the stage so that nobody can actually see him well enough to actually land a shot. Basically, the idea is to just disorient him with the bright lights on the stage, with the bright light from the stage light, so that they can't actually see him. And he also reveals that he knows where Hayami is, mainly because he was in the army, and he learned a trick where he can memorize somebody's position after they fired once. So a sneak attack isn't going to help again. At which point, Core Sensei just miraculously appears in the middle on the stage main seat in front of the stage, and proceeds to shout orders to the rest of the class so that they can actually move into advantageous positions and take out Gastro. Gastro is initially confused as to where the voice is coming from until he sees Core Sensei in his absolute defense form and tries to shoot at Core Sensei like an idiot. He realizes that he doesn't know that Core Sensei is in his absolute defense form, and doesn't know what Core Sensei even is, and he's just kind of surprised that Core Sensei is just there. But he opens fire on him anyway, and while he's reloading, Core Sensei begins giving all of the students orders by names and asking them to shuffle around, basically to new hiding places so that Gastro doesn't know where they are. And Gastro points out that this isn't going to work because now not only does he know where everybody is, but that now he knows who everybody is by name, and realizes that their temporary advantage of shuffling everybody around isn't going to work. But then Core Sensei switches tactics, and instead of giving names, he switches to the alternate naming scheme, and begins calling everybody by their numbers and also by their nicknames. So he basically starts calling them by numbers and code names, so that which only serves to further confuse Gastro, since he has no idea where anybody is. And it shows. He quickly becomes overwhelmed as it completely disorients him, and he has no idea where who anybody is and where they are. At which point everybody's in positions, and Core Sensei decides at that moment to not only order Chiba and Hayami to open fire, but he also points out that they're not in this alone, and that they can't shoulder all of their burdens by themselves, and that they need to be more than willing to realize that other people in the class have it just as hard, and they're not alone in their failures, and that if they decide to let their peers in, they can actually be some pretty accomplished assassins. Unfortunately, during this entire pep talk, Gastro reveals that he actually had enough time to formulate a counter strategy, and reveals that he knows that everybody but student 12 actually moved. Although he has no idea who student 12 is, he assumes that it's Chiba. So and at which point Core Sensei calls student 12 to open fire, and he does, and immediately gets shot point blank in the head, only for it to be revealed that it was actually a dummy that one of the students had whipped up while all of this was going on. And it only serves to disorient Gastro even more, since since the one student he knew was as a possibility is now he no longer knows who anybody is, since a dummy literally just popped up and completely confused him. At which point Shiba shows up and opens fire on Gastro, and Gastro just kind of gloats to himself, pointing out that he missed by a mile, and proceeds to aim his gun at Shiba, only to get hit in the head by the stage lights, since Shiba wasn't actually aiming at Gastro per se, but rather the brackets holding the stage lights up above his head. And while Gastro is disoriented for being hit by the stage lights, Hayami opens fire on him and finally shoots the gun out of his hand, at which point the rest of the students stockpile on him and tie him up. Kurasama is actually pretty impressed with Koro Sensei about how he was able to pull off that kind of strategy. At which point Koro Sensei points out that all people need to remember is about their failings, and about how they're not alone by themselves, and that people need an opponent to actually bring out the best in them, or otherwise they're not going to be able to succeed. And for the most part, that's exactly why he decided to become a teacher. He built his entire teaching philosophy on that notion that people need somebody to motivate them so that they can actually be better people and actually do better in society. But with Gastro down for the count, they then move in on the head honcho of this entire situation. And also Kurasama has regained some of his strength. He points out that he's only about 50%, but since he's part of the Japanese special forces, that's kind of like he's still the students even point out that he's kind of like twice as strong as a normal person, even with his diminished strength from being disoriented. At which point they realize that whoever is pulling the strings is on the top floor, and they're almost there. At which point Koro Sensei brings up a very important fact that everybody up to this point has overlooked. The guy doesn't seem to think like an assassin. As it's for the most part, the assassins that he sent were mostly arranged based on skill level, not by specialty or experience. Pointing out that Gastro was easily the most skilled guy in the entire room, and that Grip normally is normally very, very good at sneaking up behind somebody and taking them out that way. But they weren't actively arranged by that. And Kurasama finally realizes what Koro Sensei is saying, and that he doesn't think like an assassin because he isn't one, and realizes that they need to take a different approach when dealing with this guy. Begins giving orders to the rest of the class. As he's doing that, Nagisa notices that Terasuga seems out of sorts and is even burning up. And eventually surmises that Terasuga most likely got infected with the virus, but is for the most part, not the virus, but the homemade poison canister that he got blasted with, most likely, or the virus, possibly. Although if he had been infected with the virus, he probably wouldn't be standing right now. But he points out that he's fine and he's got stamina to spare. And when Nagisa points out how reckless he's being, he merely points out that this isn't the first time he's let his class down, and he doesn't want to be the guy to let them down again. So he's going to push through it regardless of how much it's going to bother him and how much it's going to hinder their skills. He points out that he doesn't want to be that guy anymore, and wants to actually try and help, even if he is handicapped by the poison. At which point the Class 3E begins to carry out their plan to corner the guy and stop him. Basically, what happens is they just sneak in with Kurasama taking the lead, and the detonator's on the desk. So Kurasama's entire idea is that when the guy goes to reach for it, once he realizes he's been stuck up upon, Kurasama's just gonna shoot at his hand and knock the detonator away so that he can't actually press it and blow up the vaccine, which is sitting on the desk next to him. However, they suddenly hear a familiar voice, pointing out that, and the voice basically states that it's disappointed that they all came instead of doing what he asked, and that they should have done what he asked to begin with, and they shouldn't have assumed that it was going to be as easy as it was, because at that moment he just pulls out a whole bunch of detonators which he just lays on the floor to confuse people, pointing out that he's the kind of guy who sets up a proxy detonator to confuse people, and that there's no guarantee that the one on the desk was indeed the real one. At which point Karasuma points out who this guy is, pointing out that he has 3 assassins as well as an old colleague to help him out with the assassination attempt. But then the 3 assassins never responded back, and on top of that, a colleague apparently went MIA. At which point it's revealed who the guy actually is, and it's Akira Takioka. You remember him? The guy that Nagisa attacked for being a dick and basically beating up Kanzaki and a whole bunch of other students. Yeah, he shows up and is apparently the main antagonist of the entire arc. He was in charge of the entire operation, and basically his entire plan was to just kind of do whatever it takes to actually get his revenge, as it were. At which point he reveals that there's no use hiding in the shadows now, and then escorts the rest of Class 3 up to the roof so that he can reveal the finer details of his plan. And the finer details of his plan is this: he specifically asked for the shortest and the tallest for the shortest boy and girl of the class, namely Nagisa and Kaede, so that he could implement the further stages of his plan. As it turns out, the reason he wanted Kaede was so that he could basically bury her alive along with Koro-sensei in a pool of anti-sensei BBs, and then Koro-sensei would have no choice but to let himself be killed by normal methods, so that he could save Kaede. And also, he wanted Nagisa there so that he could get his revenge for what Nagisa did to him. Because as it turns out, after his assassination, Takioka was basically just very cruel and treated like garbage by his colleagues. Basically he bragged a whole bunch about his teaching skills, and then he wound up getting his ass handed to him, when that obviously led to him being the subject of a lot of ridicule from his colleagues. At which point he points out that now that the plan hasn't gone exactly as he planned, they're basically just gonna do what he says anyway, because he not only does he has the vaccine, but he also has the detonator to the vaccine that will blow up if they don't do exactly what he says. Basically they have no choice but to do with him, since they're the reason he got humiliated, and therefore he's going to get his revenge one way or another. At which point all the other students come forward, specifically Terasuga, pointing out that Takioka got exactly what he deserved. He was a dick, and he understandably got called on it. Not only was he shown up for boasting about his impeccable skills, but on top of that, he got thrown out because they didn't want him to actually be their teacher anymore, because he kind of wasn't very good at it. So at which point Nagisa decides to break it up anyway, but deciding that he's going to go with Takioka, and since he is the subject of Takioka's ire, he figured he might as well try and reason with him so that they can get out of the situation. And also, I should mention that because of Nagisa's defeat of him, Takioka has actually developed a new habit. Not only has he, I should have brought this up, but not only has Takioka lost a lot of weight since we've last seen him, but he's also scratched the shit out of his face because now every time he thinks of his defeat by Nagisa, it causes his skin to itch. So he's basically just, and since that's basically his entire motivation at this point, he's completely scratched his face up, and now there's just a big mess of scars on the sides of his face. So yeah, he definitely has been in dire straits. It should be noted, he has gone completely insane since then. What little sanity he had, it's gone. He's completely crazy now. So, but in any case, Nagisa accompanies Takioka onto the helipad where there's a knife, and Nagisa stands directly next to it. Or rather, behind it. In any case, he stands near it. And Takioka prepares to have Nagisa Takioka makes basically his plan to make Nagisa apologize for all the ridicule that he's dealt with, and when Karasuma tries to interfere, pointing out that he shouldn't blow up the detonator and basically stop him from hurting Nagisa. Takeoka basically pulls out another detonator and says that he's not going to let anybody else interfere with his private time with Nagisa, as he puts it. So he blows up the ramp up to the helipad so that nobody else can get there, and now Nagisa is just stuck up there with Takeoka. At which point Takeoka lays out exactly what Nagisa is going to do. Nagisa is going to get on his hands and knees. He's going to apologize for everything he did. He's going to state that he was used a cheap trick to make up for his lack of skill, which we know isn't entirely true, but whatever. And that he's going to personally apologize for making Takeoka the laughingstock of his entire squad. And Nagisa does exactly that. He gets down on his hands and knees in front of the knife. He begs Takeoka for forgiveness and asks him to give up and give them the vaccine, and if he can see it out of the kindness of his heart. But Takeoka isn't going to do that. As it points out, or at least according to him, the lesson needs to get a little bit more that when you go against Daddy, as he puts it, that you need to be willing to pay the price. At which point he picks up the suitcase with the vaccine and chucks it with his hand, chucks it over the side of the building, and then blows it up. And everybody can't help but despair at that, because now Takeoka, in addition to being a dick, has basically just condemned 15 students to their death. So Nagisa is understandably livid about that, and then still crouching, picks up the knife, proclaiming that he's going to kill Takeoka. So yeah, that's how this episode ends. It was revealed that Akira Takeoka, he was the mastermind behind this entire island assassination arc and his entire plan to kill Koro-sensei and take over, and basically take the money for himself while also getting his revenge against Nagisa, and also using Kaede as a patsy so that he can basically just treat her however he feels like. He was planning to just stick her in a pit with a breathing tube and tied up, and then just blow, and then until Koro-sensei decided to cooperate. And I should just bring up how messed up that is. That is, I mean, granted, we've already established that Takeoka's sanity, it's gone, but that's a little it is shown to show how much of an extreme he's gone to since then, how much his mind has deteriorated since his defeat. But it's still a little messed up that's what he's planning to resort to win. So, and also the fact that he poisoned 15 students and has now blown up their only chance of recovery, that too. But yeah, for the most part, this episode is just to show how much Takeoka has fallen since we've seen him. Not only has he completely deteriorated in his mental state, it's to the point where he thinks that it's okay to bury people alive and poison kids with a handmade virus. But according to himself, he believes that he's the good guy in this situation. He believes that his teaching career was ruined because of Nagisa, even though it was his inability to actually teach. He was a bit of a drilling structure, and he didn't recognize that. He didn't recognize that his teaching style was a problem. He didn't treat the kids like kids. He treated them like soldiers. He treated them like his fellow soldiers, and thought that was an appropriate way to be teaching middle school kids when it wasn't. So Takeoka is completely in the wrong here, and yet he thinks he's the good guy. So yeah. But yeah, this episode also sets up the fact that Nagisa and Takeoka are going to have a rematch, and presumably it's not going to go as well, since Takeoka now has been basically he's lost a lot of weight, which implies that he's trained his body to the point where he's now going to be able to overpower Nagisa, or at least he thinks he's going to be able to. So yeah, that's gonna do it for this episode of Assassination Classroom and my review of it. What did you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace!